You are listening to Talkish with Halli Casser-Jayne. I am Halli Casser-Jayne. This week on Talkish, we're talking about music. The late, great Bob Marley once said, "One good thing about music is that when it hits you, you feel no pain." Thank goodness for music, right? Joining me at my table in the first half hour of Talkish to talk music, his career, and a whole lot more is Grammy-nominated singer, musician, and songwriter. We're about to steal away with Robbie Dupree. And at the bottom of the hour, a frolicking conversation with music journalist, writer, and publishing industry analyst David Hepworth, the author of a zippily entertaining portrait of the men and women who are our rock stars. His new book, Uncommon People. Let's get to it. For musicians who follow their heart's desire, the path that leads to the promised land of musical success can be fraught with many roadblocks before they reach that smooth macadam when careers take off. Robbie Dupree has traveled the long and winding road and sees himself as one of the lucky ones. From his tough beginnings in Brooklyn to his top 10 hits, Hot Rod Hearts, and Steal Away, which earned him a Grammy nomination in the early 80s for Best New Artist, Robbie Dupree's story is one of peaks and valleys, highs and lows, a long and winding road, to be sure. From the rich creative atmosphere of the late 60s, through his Woodstock years that were the 70s, to his chart-busting hits of the early 80s and onward, Dupree's talent has never stagnated, ever evolving. His associations with some of the greatest of the music industry, David Sancious, Larry Hoppen, Leslie Smith, Rick Chudacoff, and Peter Bunetta, seeping into his musical soul. 11 albums later, with his contribution to the genre known as Yacht Rock, Dupree, it can be safely said, has met his heart's desire and reached the musical promised land. Let's steal away with Robbie Dupree. It's time for Talkish. Let's talk. So listen, Robbie, you didn't actually come from a musical family, right? Is that correct?
That's correct. I did not come from a musical family. My mom was a housewife and my father was an auto mechanic.
Okay. So when did you discover you had the I call it the beat, the musical thing going on you? When did you figure that out?
I think it was a slow process. You know, I started to sing as a kid in Brooklyn, very unofficially, and then it sort of graduated into wanting to play at a party, and learning a little bit of guitar. And, it was not really something that I felt struck with it to be an artist. It wasn't until much later that it all dawned on me that it's what I wanted to do for a living. But that was years after I began singing.
So you were raised in Brooklyn. You talk about it. Everything where I go, it says tough beginning. How tough was it? Was it really tough?
I don't know if, I think East New York, Cypress Hills at that time had different connotations for different people. I tended to hang out on the other side on Liberty Park and places that were for people who were kind of looking for trouble. And I think I created much of my own.
You like to create trouble? You still like to create trouble?
No. I've retired from trouble. But I mean, at that time, I was the littlest kid in the class and the youngest kid in high school. And I think I tried extra hard to show that they should choose me in the games and they should pick me for things. It's just, I was 12 years old when I went to high school. So I was way over my head. I think I behaved badly.
I was like you. I can relate to that. I was the little kid in the class. I was the youngest in the class. It makes you tough too, doesn't it? Hear me.
Yeah.
Right?
I guess it does. Yeah, I think you're just trying to make sure that people consider you for more than just being a little kid,
Right, exactly. So here's the other thing. Is music a choice or a calling?
Well, for Stevie Wonder, it was a calling. For me, it was a choice.
Okay, and how does that manifest?
I think I did not want to do what I was born into. I think it was a blue-collar life in a blue-collar neighborhood, and the kind of opportunities that were available to me were different, let's say, than what I wanted to do. And when music presented itself as a possibility of that for me, I think I jumped on it. And that's really what happened with me. It was an alternative. And my goal was not to become a hit recording artist or any of that, but just to maybe do it as a living.
Singer, musician, poet.
Singer, musician, yeah.
And a poet. You're a jack of all trades, so to speak. Out of the three, which best defines that which you feel most comfortable with?
Gee, I don't know. I suppose singer is probably most important.
Okay. And then, therefore, how do the other aspects fit in?
It's a very long explanation. I'll try to make it very short. Each piece came to me slowly. I did not begin writing. I did not really begin as a singer. I began as a guitar player and a blues harmonica player in a band. And the first really good band I had was with a very young Nile Rodgers and myself and a couple of other guys from Brooklyn and Manhattan, where Nile came from. And it evolved more by necessity. In those young bands, people come and go every couple of weeks, and they needed a singer and they needed a songwriter. And I think I just evolved slowly into those things.
Your early influences, you say one was Marvin Gaye, another was Sam Cooke. So listen to what I'm going to say to you, Robbie. They were smooth, both of them. I can't think of a better word for either of them. Smooth. I want to throw in another word, sensual. Behind everything that you do and have done, all that you create, there is a certain sensuality. That's not a word that we use often these days, partially because I think we're not a subtle society anymore, and sensuality is something that's very subtle. I'm giving you a compliment here.
Thank you.
Even back in the day, sex trumped sensuality. So I think it's fair to say that is true of the rhythms that you create, the words that you write, the style you impart. Is sensual a word? Is sensual something, even as a young man in the business, that you embraced? Or were you unaware that you had that? Do you use it now? Talk to me.
I didn't think I had it, but I certainly was attracted to the music of people who had it. And it seemed that I related much more to that than to the hard rock that was coming along at the time I was coming up. I think I didn't relate very well to that. And so the R&B singers that I loved, the songs I loved, I always tell the story of when I was 12, I first heard the record, I Only Have Eyes for You by the Flamingos. And I loved that record. I thought it was one of the best records and still is one of the most sensual and magnetic records I ever heard. And I think that's what drew me to it. I didn't have the kind of a voice that would be power rock, or any of that. And so I wrote to my voice, and I wrote to the stuff that I loved in history, my history of music.
It's interesting because when I think of the word sensual, it's also something that's inside of us, right? I mean, there are some people who just project sensuality. There are others who project, I think rock stars are more sexuality. Somewhere in between there's Robbie. It's fascinating to me. I want to go back to New York. I want to go back to Brooklyn, leaving Brooklyn and going to Manhattan. You were how old at the time? You were a pup.
I got out of the Navy when I was 19, and I went shortly after that to Manhattan. And it was in Manhattan that I hooked up with Nile, and that really was the first time that I felt the glimmer of possibility, that, what was really happening. I could tell the way people reacted to that band and to the overall charisma, let's say, of that group of people. We were a mixed race band, and at that time it was hard to get work anywhere else but Manhattan. And people may not remember it or not been around for it, but those days were very racially segregated in Queens and Long Island and various places where the clubs were to play at. And so as an unknown band, we just had trouble getting work except in New York City.
You tell a funny story about that, I heard, where you're going from place to play and had to be escorted. Talk about that.
Yeah, well, when we played at a place up on 125th Street in Harlem, way before the new Harlem, and it was a dangerous place at that time. And when we would finish a job, Nile and his cousin Tom Murray, they were both Black Panthers, by the way. They would escort my friend and bass player John and myself and a drummer that we worked with to the train station on 125th Street just to make sure that we made it out with our instruments. And we had to do the same thing for them and other singers and players in our neighborhood as well. It's the same kind of thing.
New York in those days was amazing. Amazing. So much happening in that town. And let's go to the rhythms of our lives. So you land in Woodstock. People, places, we are the sum of our parts, Robbie. And it all came together in Woodstock for you, right? As it did, by the way, for many. It's a magical place back then. your creative juices seem to be flowing. You formed many bands during that period, and by the middle of the 70s, you're starting to get national recognition. Tell me about landing in Woodstock and what that meant to you as a musician, as a man.
Well, when I left New York, I left because the band with Nile broke up, and I knew that I didn't have the energy to put another effort out to put something like that together. And so everybody had heard about Woodstock and upstate New York at that time. There was a big movement. I like to think of it as the Whole Earth Catalog movement, to drop out and go somewhere nice. And so I did. I got a job as a bartender in a college town called New Paltz. I'd never bartended before, but I had the ability with people. So it worked out okay. And from there, I met a lot of musicians, and the trail led to Woodstock. I moved there and was blown away by the fact that on the street were all of these incredible people who were like heroes to me, from Van Morrison and Paul Butterfield and, the members of the band and on, just a tremendous amount of great people in a small town. There were recording studios in abundance, and we're talking about a place that had 5,000 people. So I knew I was going to stay there and give it another try there. And that's what I did. It was another place to start over again without knowing anybody. But that seems to have been a pattern in my life that still goes on. And Woodstock has been a great opportunity for me. It's not where I made my hits, and it's not where that all occurred. But it was certainly the proving grounds for a lot of my talents and my writing.
Safe place for you.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
Yeah, and you still have it. You still live there, right?
Yes, I
do. Yeah. A lot of changes. I have a question. I have a lot of questions. Here's another question. When the world starts to pay attention to you, how does that affect how you start to pay attention to your music, to yourself? Is notoriety a distraction, an infusion, an elixir, good, dangerous? All of this came to you when you were relatively young. Talk to me about that aspect of what happened to Robbie.
Well, it's a funny thing because it's all of the things that you described. It's intoxicating, it's dangerous, it's fun, it's exciting, but it's definitely got thorns on it. And I guess for me, I was overwhelmed by it because I was playing in bars and clubs and really had never experienced anything like what happened to me in 1980. As a matter of fact, I had recorded this music in Los Angeles and was unable to get a record deal. And after, having people try to shop it, friends try to shop it, I realized there wasn't going to be a deal. Everybody had passed. So I didn't really have a skill or a real education. And so I went back and got a job through a friend of mine loading trucks in Long Island. And it was there that I got a phone call from my drummer's brother who played a cassette for somebody in a social event. And that led, this guy got moved by the music and overrode people and got me a deal at Elektra. So it really was being drawn back into it, having let go. And I don't know, it took a really long time to settle down with the idea that I had become in the public eye, because it just never had happened. I mean, we're not talking about playing in a club with 100 people in it. We're talking about the public eye, like internationally. So it was a lot, and it took a while. And I think still to this day, it's amazing to me that it ever happened. I feel like there's such a big element of luck and so many more talented people than me around that didn't ever get an opportunity. So I'm still in awe of it.
2 top singles, Steal Away, Hot Rod Hearts, you even earned a Grammy nod for the Best New Artist. You lost out to, my brain just fried. Christopher Cross. Is this the best of times for you when you look back?
No. It was a very confusing time, like I said. It wasn't a slow ramp up where you get to learn about what's going on. It was really, in other words, the business that I'd been in before had nothing to do with the business that I was now in. I didn't even have a manager or an attorney or anything. So I just got dropped into this quite through the back door. And remember, we made most of this record on speculation and with no record deal and nobody behind us and first-time producers and a home studio in North Hollywood. We weren't really on the radar. And so, it's hard to say it was the best of times because it was very confusing. It was the best of times in terms of making it with my really good friends who I'd followed to California. But there were a lot of downsides. It had a big effect on my marriage. It's a lot of things get hit with it, and it's not so much how you change, it's how other people change toward you.
Wow. You're an introspective guy.
Well, you see it. You don't have to be introspective. You see it in small ways, like friends that used to be dropping in all the time. Woodstock was an open door. Everybody just came in, and you could come home and find people in your house, just friends of yours hanging out. And all of a sudden, nobody came, nobody called, and all of these friends of mine started to think of me as different, like maybe I should make an appointment, and I was always surprised by how they reacted to me. And people really watch you to see, because I think in a way they're looking for you to change. If you send a hamburger back because it's not cooked well enough, everybody's like, oh, look at him now, sending a hamburger back. So you're under the magnifying glass a lot.
Yeah, that can't be fun. I want to, I'm going to throw out 3 words. Okay. This, you and I talked off air before, and this is just so funny. So as I told Robbie off air, I've been following his career. Every time somebody says Robbie Dupree to me, for one way or the other, I had a lot of the guys on that you're playing with now in the last couple of years, and it's like I'm attached. And I remembered why I was attached when I was doing background on you today and yesterday. The Brandywine Cafe.
Wow, you're kidding me.
I am not kidding you. You and I hung out together at the Brandywine Cafe.
Wow, that's amazing.
I was there every day for like a year at 4:00 playing backgammon.
Holy! So I was.
You're there. We're playing.
I was a host there at that time at the restaurant. This is when I first moved to California, and
crazy.
To make a living, while I was recording, I worked at the Brandywine, and I can't believe that. That's amazing.
That I even knew how many people mentioned the Brandywine to you, and that to get in there sometimes we had to know you.
Wow, that's crazy.
So I was a regular. I was a cute young thing.
Well, I was known for that.
that's where all I'm going to go, honey. But is that ironic?
It is ironic. And, I rode by only, let's see, when did I play in L.A.? In September.
No kidding.
And I stayed in the marina, and I drove past Lincoln Boulevard, and I saw the place. And it's funny, it's not the same anymore, but it's funny how tiny the place was compared to what it felt like when I worked there.
Oh, wow. We loved that place. I was living on the beach in Venice with a bunch of friends, and what a cast of characters were around in those days. Maria Muldaur was one. Kenny Rankin was another. It was. Oh my gosh, what a crazy time!
That is something.
I know. So there you go. See, you never know who you're going to meet on the way back, through, and over. So anyway, fame. It's fickle and she's fleeting. And when she left you, where did that leave Robbie Dupree?
Well, in the beginning, it was tough because, you lose your record deal and, a lot of people, everybody loses their deal at some point. But I felt that mine was shortcut a little bit by extenuating circumstances. And those were that there was a big RICO investigation of independent promotion at Warner Brothers and Elektra and Asylum and all those. And a lot of people got fired, and the people that had signed me were people that got fired. So I went out with them. And the first couple of years were tough, and you reevaluate. And what I came up with, I really wanted to continue doing it. And I was pretty sure that it would never happen again, that there would be that kind of lightning in the bottle thing. But, I decided to work harder and to do more. And so I began writing and recording again independently and for companies in Japan and in Europe and eventually back in America. And I just carved out the place I have in the business now, which is working, writing, making records, and doing what I always wanted to do, but I don't feel like I have the same pressure.
Which is a good thing, I'm sure. And you have so much more creative leeway this way as well. It's interesting. You could have been I think you could have turned into a car salesman or a realtor. I know a lot of people, who had that one shot who didn't stick with it. And look how it's paid off for you. Let's talk Jimmy Fallon.
Okay.
He loves you.
He does. And it's a funny thing. I don't know if you know how I got the hit on that show, but I had come back from doing some gigs. And I came back to some messages. I can't remember in what form, but they were all from people, well-wishers, who were saying, "Hey, did you see Rolling Stone magazine this week or this month or whatever?" And I hadn't seen Rolling Stone in years. And so I went into town and I bought a copy, and I couldn't find anything that they were talking about. And finally I saw a story with Jimmy Fallon and Questlove, and they were talking about what they called mashups. People probably know what that is. It's like unlikely combinations of people together. And they asked Jimmy, who have you not had on the show that you really want to have? And there it was in print, me. And I thought, that's amazing. So I called my booking agent and I said, this is even a job that you can get me. Because the guy just called me out in print, And sure enough, eventually we got the booking and did the show, and I found out what I didn't know, how much of a fan Jimmy was of not only me, but the music of the period, which he really just loved. And in fact, on the show, he asked if he could sit in and sing in the background section with the two women that were singing with me at the time. And a couple of months later, he called up and asked if he could attend my show here in Woodstock and bring his parents and his wife. And he came again to the show and came up and sang again. And he had his father come up and sing. And it was really quite, again, startling. I don't think of things in that way, but there it was, So he's been a big fan and a supporter. And I wish him the best with his new, now that he's on the new network and he has the bigger show, it's a little harder for him to do the kind of independent bookings that he used to do. So I don't plan on being back on the new show, but the old show was really fun.
I hope he gets you back, and he needs to get it back, by the way, just my opinion, into a little bit more of his own booking in there. Anyway, the footage is on YouTube, everybody, and you need to go watch it. It's phenomenal, just phenomenal. Yacht Rock, the term. I can't tell you how many people write me, because I've had Burley on and a few other people. You've got a huge fan base going here. It's a funny name, but talk to me.
Well, we had nothing to do with the name. That music, we're talking about mid-'70s to like 1982 or 1983, something like that. That was always called soft rock or easy listening rock or whatever. I don't know. But a number of years ago, and in no small part, Jimmy Fallon capitalizing on this, the term yacht rock came up in a funny internet parody, and then it was manifest into the genre. It took time. But 5 years ago, I got a call from Brian Ray, who plays with Paul McCartney, and he said, I just saw this band called Yacht Rock Review out of Atlanta, Georgia, and they were amazing, and they love your music, and they'd love you to call them, and I did. And so 5 years ago, they invited me to guest on one of their shows, and I was the first one of the, quote, original artists to perform with them. It turns out that they built this youth following where it's nothing to see 2,000 and 3,000 people at one of the shows. They're all under 30, and they know every lyric to every song by all of the Christopher Cross and myself and Toto and Ambrosia and all of the groups that are represented under Yacht Rock. So some people resisted the name at first, but now it's become a valid genre. And so I'm lucky because I have what I do today, and then I have the old career of what I did yesterday. But instead of it being playing for old people, it's playing for college kids. And it's really remarkable. I'm
going to talk to you about what you're doing today. Oh my gosh. First of all, I love the fact that you don't stand still. I do. And I mean, you were talking about You Only Have Eyes. But that Blue Monday, good God.
Yeah, it's a cool song. Yeah.
No, well, forget the cool song. Let's the cool Robbie. The sensual Robbie at his best, by the way. The jazz, this is great stuff you're doing now. Are you having a good time with all this?
I am having a good time with it, and it's believe it or not, by hanging around for such a long time, you actually get an opportunity, if you want, to get better. And I feel like I practice every day, and I try to work really hard on being better, and not just going out and playing Steal Away and Hot Rod Hearts, in a kind of an oldies way, and it's harder. You don't have the big audience for what I call the new material, but that's not what I do it for. It's legacy music. It's something that I want to do as a personal statement. And if 1,000 people like it or 100 people like it, I'm still going to continue until I don't feel like I'm improving.
We have a whole new music industry going on. I'm curious as to whether you think that a lot of what's happening is good, bad, or indifferent. You did take on Warner Brothers to get your stuff back. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. How hard was that? And have you opened up a can of worms that needed to be opened up? Who owns the rights to? Well,
the fact of it is that the deals that the record companies made with people was, tantamount to slavery. And there was a statute that existed on the books. It does exist on the books that records made in a certain period of time would be a fair game in 35 years. And through an attorney in Los Angeles named Evan Cohen, who's somebody who stands up to them all the time, they reached out to me and asked me if I would be their guinea pig for this a couple of years ago. And I said yes, and it took 2 years. But then just past April, all my master recordings reverted to me, which was great because to be here now and to have control of them. For example, the first thing that happened probably a week after I got the masters back is that I got a sync license for Better Call Saul, which happened immediately. Now that normally would have gone into the big record company and the money would have been cut up so many ways and I would have got little or nothing out of it. But this time I got it all, which was fair and good after all of the money they've made for 35 years.
I'm so glad you did it. It's such an important thing, and we're living in such a weird climate when it comes to artistry these days anyway. The least you can do is own your own material, that's for sure. Look, buddy, you've been up, you have been down, you've been in, you've been out, 70-ish. 70-ish?
70.
You got a birthday coming up, though.
Yep, on December 23rd.
Happy birthday.
Thanks.
More sensual than ever, right? Who would have thunk it?
Who would have thunk? I know you. Was I a gentleman with you?
You were. You were sweet. Actually, you were sweet.
Good.
I'm sorry you don't remember me. I was adorable.
I probably remember you, but we're talking about a long time ago.
No, I'm kidding. I wouldn't expect it. And I didn't myself until I saw the magic words there. Oh, my gosh. And then it all came flooding back. Lessons about this trip, this train, this road you've been on. What, above all the other lessons that you learned from traveling that winding road, what was the great surprise, first of all, in this long life and well-lived life? And leave us also maybe with one piece of advice.
Well, I think finding a passion in life was not something that I was taught as a kid growing up. It was something that I learned from making this choice and allowing me to have a great life that I've had and continue to have. I would say that finding a passion is worth the journey if it comes to you quickly or if it takes forever. And the advice I would have is simple. Keep it simple. Don't get too spread out. Just concentrate on the things that you can deal with and don't bite off more than you can chew.
Thanks, Robbie.
You're welcome.
I've been speaking with musician Robbie Dupree. Steal away to his website, www.robbiedupree.com for a listen to his latest music, including an amazing cover of I Only Have Eyes for You, and to find out when Robbie Dupree is coming to a city near you. You are listening to Talkish with Halli Casser-Jayne, the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. My guests today are Grammy-nominated singer, songwriter, musician Robbie Dupree, and music journalist and publishing industry analyst David Hepworth, the author of Uncommon People, The Rise and Fall of the Rock Stars. Talkish with Halli Casser-Jayne is always available on hallicasser-jayne.com. David Hepworth, music journalist, writer, and publishing industry analyst, begins his new book, Uncommon People, The Rise and Fall of the Rock Stars, with this declaration: the age of the rock star, like the age of the cowboy, has passed. Neil Young, are you listening? In a rock and rolling pep rally and memorial, Hepworth's elegy takes us on the long and winding road through rock and roll history. The up and down beats of an era that offered swagger and recklessness, charisma, self-belief, good hair, and above all was riff with talent we can only wish to have. Larger than life, but also like us, names like Harrison and Morrison, Elvis and Lewis, Nicks and Joplin, Chuck Berry, Madonna, Bowie, and more come to life on the pages of Hepworth's book. The tales of the uniquely motivated nobodies who went about turning themselves into the ultimate somebodies, who shaped our realities and titillated our fantasies because, after all, Uncommon People isn't just their story, it's ours as well. Hepworth, a legend in his own right, launched several successful British magazines during his long and storied career. He presented the definitive BBC rock music program, Whistle Test, and anchored the coverage of Live Aid in '85. He's the radio columnist for The Guardian and a media correspondent for the newspaper, and the author of Never a Dull Moment. It's time for Talkish. Let's talk. So here we are. I have to say, this is where we go. This is a great, wonderful read. You write with a very special style. The age of the rock star, like the age of the cowboy, has passed. That's how you start this book. The idea of the rock star, like the idea of the cowboy, lives on. David, what do you think Neil Young, Rock and Roll Never Dies, is going to say about this? I mean, this is just Uncommon People, the rise and fall of the rock stars. You really believe what you wrote there? Talk to me.
Oh yeah, I do. I think despite all the songs, I don't think this stuff goes on forever. I think music tends to have eras. You could say the same thing about jazz. Jazz starts, at the end of the First World War, then kind of pieces out at the end of the 50s. It doesn't mean that the music disappears, but it means that its time as the kind of engine of popular music doesn't last. And so, there was a time when the mainstream of American popular music was jazz. And then it was replaced by rock and roll. And nowadays, the mainstream of popular music, I would venture, is hip-hop. And then it'll be something else. And that's absolutely fine. But what interested me was that although I don't think we produce any more rock stars, the idea of the rock star, oddly enough, has never been more powerful than it is now. And, I frequently go and Google, and I Google the expression, well, I advise your listeners to do this as well, Google the expression like a rock star and see if you can come up with the most ludicrous use of do something like a rock star. And the most recent one I found was a needlework site that promised it would teach you how to sew like a rock star. So we've heard about rock star politicians and rock star chefs and rock star scientists, rock star athletes. Well, now you're going to get rock star needlework. So I think it's interesting because it says something about the qualities that we associated with rock stars. And I've thought about this a lot, and I think there are three key ones. There's recklessness, the idea that they just do something and, they don't think about it first. They act completely off the top of their head. The next is sexual charisma, because it's quite interesting to me that the people who became big, we talk about rock stars, kind of sex gods or whatever. Generally speaking, they're not quite good looking enough to be movie stars. There's a kind of rock star good looks, which is not the same as movie star good looks. And the third quality is interesting shoes. So those are my three, rules that you can use: recklessness, sexual charisma, and interesting shoes. So what do you think of that?
I think that's great. I think that's absolutely great. Absolutely. I don't know about the shoes part. I have to think about that. But here's something I do want to ask you. Just get serious for a minute. And that's, why did you write this? Are you lamenting the end of the era of rock and roll? Crying out to the gods of music? We've lost our music. Wait, let me finish. Are you yelling at the suits for killing creativity when business began to trump art rather than, as I think, cultivate it? We're in a time of where individuality has been annihilated. It's like expressing scorn for the bean counters. I have a lot to say about them because they get into they're more interested in the bottom line than talent these days. But why did you write it? What impelled you? What compelled you?
I've got to have something to do, and I had a contract to write a book, and I wanted to write it. My previous book was about music in 1971, which did very well, and so the publishers want to do another one, and I thought, I want to write a book about rock stars. I'm really interested in rock stars, and I've got to use this kind of. I've got a lifetime's accumulation of useless knowledge. Well, it's useless unless I write a book. My mother used to say, "You'll never make a living out of that kind of thing." Well, Mum, I did. So. Yeah. That's why I did it. Am I indignant about it? No, I don't think I am at all. And I don't agree. I think, Colonel Tom Parker, who managed Elvis Presley, was more interested in money than anybody working in the music business nowadays. It was always, what interests me about about rock as a field is that nobody's motivations in rock and roll are pure. You will never find anyone with pure motivations. Their motivations are a mix of ego, creativity, principle, competition, greed. All these kind of things are all swimming about together, and they're all kind of playing off each other. And that, to me, is what interests me about the subject, that it's a kind of an arena. It's a prism through which you can look at people. That, to me, is what's really interesting about it. I think it's very difficult for people to have the same kind of projection of personality nowadays that they did back in the day, because, I say that I think it would be pretty much impossible for anybody to act nowadays in the way that, say, Robert Plant or, I don't know, David Bowie did back in 1972, because they'd be forced to apologize on pretty much a daily basis via social media, because we live in a very censorious world. Whereas these people didn't. They just did what they did. And they were kind of often transgressive, So we kind of expected them to be a bit naughty, to be a bit racy, We didn't get to know what it was that they did. That they lived these kind of shadowy lives. They were away on tour or whatever. Whereas nowadays, if I want to look up what Taylor Swift has been doing today, I could probably find out. It wouldn't be hard.
Right.
So, you can't have the same mystique in this world. We live in the 24-hour daylight of social media. Whereas, these people were products of the days of kind of newspapers and physical product and so forth.
Well, the magic, there was magic. Passed. Right. There's no more magic because everything is exposed these days, which is kind of sad. I have two questions I want to get to before, and so let me go with me here. First of all, what kind of shoes do you wear?
Well, what kind of shoes? That's why I'd never make a rock star. I've got a very dull pair of desert boots on, I'm not, believe you me, I'm not rock star material.
No.
I'm looking at rock star material.
Okay. I wondered whether the inside of little David was a rock star dying to come out.
Not at all. My rock star fantasies are entirely, confined to posing with a tennis racket in front of a dressing, a wardrobe mirror at about the age of 15. Never gone any further than that.
That was it, huh? Let's go back to the beginning of this. You profile 40 of the greats of the era and define the era's heyday from 55 to 1997. There's a historical context here because it's the end of World War II, beginning of the baby boomers and the effects of the kids growing up, different kind of culture than pre-war. Is that important to part of the development of what happened?
Oh, undoubtedly. Undoubtedly. Well, I suppose you've also got the invention of leisure time, that for the generation slightly older than Elvis Presley, the leisure time didn't exist, did it? You worked every hour God sent to kind of, put dinner on the table or whatever. Whereas, during the 50s, you start getting a surplus. And so, even though most of these people, these originators of rock and roll, the Elvis Presleys and Jerry Lee Lewisons and so forth, they came from very poor backgrounds, but nothing like as poor as what their parents had come from. And so you get disposable cash, you get, the birth of the record business, and all this is really bound up with the growth of the record business, because with a record, you had to have kind of brand names to get people to buy things. You had to believe in the people in order to believe in the music. And that particularly was the case in the 1970s, where you very often go and buy records without hearing them. And therefore, you needed a kind of leap of faith of some kind to invest your hard-earned money in a record. And very often you take the record home and it might disappoint you, but you would never admit it to yourself because your investment was made in that person. You had signed on to be a fan of the Beatles or Pink Floyd or whoever, early on, and you weren't going to abandon that. Whereas I was talking to somebody the other day who was telling me that their 12-year-old daughter was, listening to new tunes on Spotify or whatever online. And the amount of time she gave each tune to impress her was 10 seconds, sorry, 10 seconds.
Oh, my gosh.
Before she clicked on to the next one. That's a totally different relationship with music than it was back in the days when you bought Pink Floyd's Gumma and sat through all four sides.
And over and over and over and over and over again, right. By the way. Right. You kept listening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, right.
Well, because you did, yes, definitely.
Yeah, we were a different kind of breed.
Music was imprinted on you.
Right. Absolutely.
Sorry.
Okay, so the first rock star you say was Little Richard. He was the original. Talk to me about that. And what I think we've covered the definition of a rock star. Did we cover the definition of rock idol? And I know that those are different.
Well, I distinguish between Little Richard, my first rock star in 1955, and 1956, Elvis Presley, my rock idol. I think Elvis in his early days certainly was the girls' favorite. It was something invented by girls because they loved looking at him apart from anything else. Little Richard, what people responded to was the way he sounded, because he just sounded absolutely crazy. And I chose him to start the book because I just wanted to write the story of him, making Tutti Frutti in New Orleans. And he pretty much made it by mistake. It was an obscene song that he played just to amuse the band during a lunch break. He never dreamed that it could ever be recorded, but they hurriedly rewrote the lyrics, a kind of bowdlerized version, and then went and recorded it. And I think they did 2 takes at the end of the day. And when you listen to it now, it still sounds like the sound of something done in 2 takes at the end of the day. It's like, get this down, we may never have another opportunity. And I think it's still an absolutely extraordinary record. And Little Richard, was this utterly larger-than-life strange figure who communicated himself to people all over the world. And so at the same time, you had people like Keith Richards, who was at primary school in the UK, and David Bowie. I think it's David Bowie who said that before Little Richard, the world was black and white, and after Little Richard, the world was in colour.
Oh my God!
So I think he kind of defined a certain kind of rock stardom, but he wasn't the only one. There were many different species of rock stardom. That's one of the points I wanted to make in the book, and that's why I've done one person for each year on one day between 1955 and 1995.
Some people might say, I don't think you would, but some people would say that anything after Little Richard was a copycat, was a play on him. I'm not so sure, obviously, that you would say that. But is there a certain truth that there's a certain something that all of these characters, male and female, more male than female, had that followed that mode? Is it a monolith or a
I think
variation of the theme?
I think they all projected personality through their music. I think that's the thing that they all have in common, that, use music as a way to project their personality. And the personality was a huge part of what we like about the music. Its relationship between the music and the personality is the thing that I've tried to get at in this book. And Little Richard, just did it completely out of the box, I probably never really did it again in quite the same way. I'm not a great believer in originators, because Little Richard pinched a huge amount of, what he did from other people, and other people then pinched a load from him, So in 1957, just 2 years after Little Richard has made Tutti Frutti, the young Paul McCartney is impressing John Lennon in Wilton Village in Liverpool with his impression of Little Richard, because that's what got Paul McCartney into the Beatles, or the Quarrymen, as they were in those days, was that he could do Little Richard. It was an impression he did. So it's a river of influence. There's no tidy beginning, in terms of the musical influence.
David, you were so eminently quotable. I mean, I could write down 50,000 things, which I did, by the way, along the way and underlined as I'm reading this. You said they were a tribe of uniquely motivated nobodies who went about turning themselves into the ultimate somebodies. Is that somehow different than the hip-hoppers of today or the crooners who came before them? Was that one of the things? See, I just think these rock folks... Yeah, go ahead.
I think it is different from the crooners that came before, because in the old days you had to kind of pass an audition, if I can put it this way. You had to be hired to do it by somebody senior to you. The band leader had to decide that Frank Sinatra or Bing Crosby could join the band as a singer. Rock stars didn't really have to do that. They had to just carve out their own little space and do what it is that they did, and just people would find their way to them. And, on the point about they were the ultimate nobodies, if you look at people like Janis Joplin, people like Pete Townsend, people like Ian Dury, it's difficult to imagine them ever breaking through in any other area of entertainment, because they wouldn't have got past the gatekeepers. They wouldn't have got past the audition. Whereas rock and roll provided them a way of doing what they did on their own terms. They just had that window of opportunity, and they took advantage of it. They didn't do it like anybody else did it. They did it the way they did it. One of the points I was making, I was actually talking to my publisher about this. I said, these people used to design their own album covers. Of course, in the world of books, they think, that's amazing. Their own album covers.
It's true.
Because in music, every aspect of the packaging was kind of part of the artist's job. It was to do the whole thing. Whereas we don't expect the same thing to go on in films or books. And we don't expect the same thing to go on in the world of dance bands. Now, it could be it still goes on in the world of hip-hop, although hip-hop's a far more cooperative medium, I think, than rock and roll was. So if you look on the record credits, and most of the people I've written about in this book, there's one or two people write their songs. If you look at the average hit nowadays, go and have a look on the Billboard chart and see how many people wrote the songs in the top 10. You probably find 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Right.
You know, they're made by committee. You know, that's the nature of the way the music is made. It's made by committee. I don't say that to denigrate it. That's just the way it is.
Just different.
But it wasn't the same in the rock star era.
Right. So here, I'm going to say to you that what you don't know about me, which is I produced a rockumentary on the Doors and contributed to Doors drummer John Denmore's book, Riders on the Storm. Lived, breathed, died the Doors for a period of time. You talk about Jim Morrison in Uncommon People. Did you see him as uncommon? I'm curious as what your position on him was.
Well, what interested me about Jim Morrison is I think he became, because of that awful old cliche, live fast, die young, and leave a good-looking corpse. Nobody did that better than Jim Morrison. That he was fortunate to be memorialized in some of the most extraordinary photographs. And for many people, particularly younger people, he is the stereotype of the rock star, the kind of thing that I've been saying doesn't really exist. But he does have that, and I think that's a huge amount to do with the way he looked. If he hadn't looked that way, he wouldn't be remembered in quite the same way at all. Because looks are a huge part of this. Not always conventionally handsome, although he was conventionally handsome.
Till the end.
Because, as I think I said earlier, that rock star good looks are very often not the same as movie star good looks, whereas his were. His definitely were. And the records, appear to have stood up really well for lots
think
and
so,
lots
yeah.
of people.
Absolutely. I don't think he looked so great at the end, by the way.
I never liked it very much at the time.
Really?
Sorry?
I first of all, I was at the concert in Miami. I just loved the chapter that you did on him, and everybody, you got to pick up this book and read it, but you really need to read that chapter because you captured him.
Oh, you were at the chapter in Miami?
No, I'm talking about in your book. Yeah, I was at the concert. I sure was.
So did he expose himself?
Listen to me. What I'm going to say to you, what everybody asks me the same question, and I always say the same thing. Who knows? Who knows? Who knows? Are you kidding? That place was so filled with marijuana. God knows what else. We were all seeing all sorts of things.
I made
and you make the point.
I think I made the point. I think I made the point in the book that a rock god likes to think that if he goes to the trouble of exposing himself, at least people notice.
You got me. But that was a big venue, let me tell you what. It was huge.
Right.
It was absolutely huge. But the reason I brought him up was not to tout my book or to tout Morrison so much as I want to talk about the price fame in the story of the rock star. Are we as their groupies, and we are groupies, and like you said, even if the medium isn't still in its heyday, we still remain the groupies to our bands and our rock stars. Are we
complicit
in their flameouts?
Well, for a start, they don't all flame out,
but a lot.
Some do.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think a huge proportion. I don't think it's any more than sports stars, probably. It's when I started doing this book, 4 of the greats of 50s rock and roll, Little Richard, Jerry Lee Lewis, Chuck Berry, and Fats Domino, were still alive.
Right.
Since then, the number has decreased to 2. But these people lasted a long time. These people are very often made of very tough stuff. Keith Richards, Mick Jagger, Paul McCartney. These people are still going. But I do think we make unrealistic demands on them. We expect them to stick around, but at the same time we expect them to remain forever young. We want them to be hugely popular, but at the same time, we want them to be sufficiently accessible that we can always get to see them. And, you know, so we do ask of them things that we don't ask of other people. We also turn up our nose about the fact that they're interested in money. Well, we're all interested in money. You know, we don't think that's odd. You know, why do we go to work? Well, we go to work to earn money. And then we ask, why are the Rolling Stones still on tour? They're doing it to earn money. They're doing it also because they got addicted to a kick at about the age of 19, a kick which is still available to them in their 70s. And that doesn't apply to any other sector of the population. Why wouldn't they do it?
Right. Absolutely. I agree with you. It's fascinating, and it's so in their blood. It's clear. And maybe that's important to, so few people get to do what they really love in life either. That's another thing that they stand for. I absolutely love the last line in your book. I'm not going to tell it. But let me take you here, and this is a little long what I want to say, but I want to be this, how we wind down this conversation. We are thick in the age of hip-hop, right? The Kanye Wests. And we've got the Justin Biebers, and you talk about Adele. I think she's a throwback, David. I don't think she's reminiscent of the time, but we'd probably argue about that. But you make the point in Uncommon People that we use the term rock star as a definition maybe too broadly, erratically, and in many cases even inappropriately. And I think you're right about that. But what becomes a legend? And here's where I want to go with you. The other side of all of this might just be that we need them more than ever now. We need now in these crazy times to hold on to something in what was once a collective conscience. And you and I come from the same generation. So we knew that things were slightly different in how people interacted and related in our time. Just like there were no movie stars anymore, right? Would you agree with that? They're not. They're just not there. And you could say the same thing of writers because they outsource their work or their brands. Clothing designers who are also brands rather than innovators. So, David, here's what I want to get to. At the heart of your book is the reality that the uncommon is no longer common, but incredibly rare. That's why I think we hold on to that age of rock. Talk to me.
Yeah, well, yes, that's possibly true. I mean, I think social media has made a huge difference in all kinds of ways. I think social media has enabled people to kind of make themselves famous on a certain level. So we don't seek the same things from fame. But I tell you one thing that I've got a screensaver here of a picture of taken in the Oval Office when Elvis Presley conned his way in there in 1970 and had his picture taken with Richard Nixon. And so you got the rock star and the president, locked in this rather awkward photo opportunity. And I can't help thinking that those were the days when the rock star was the unpredictable one.
Oh, my God. Oh, what could I say after that? I've been speaking with David Hepworth. His book, Uncommon People, The Rise and Fall of the Rock Stars. For more information on David and his book, visit his website at davidhepworth.com. Uncommon People is available on Amazon.com and in fine bookstores everywhere. Thanks so much for tuning in to Talkish with Halli Casser-Jayne, the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, a production of Resec LLC. Be sure to tune in to Talkish Wednesdays. New podcasts posted 3 p.m. Eastern at hallicasser-jayne.com. Until next time, this is Halli Casser-Jayne.